Jake Morrison had been tracking wild Mustangs across the Arizona desert for 15 years, but nothing prepared him for what happened that scorching afternoon in 1887. The stallion he'd been pursuing for 3 weeks suddenly turned on him, its eyes wild with something that wasn't just fear, it was desperation. As the magnificent beast charged, Jake's lasso caught around the saddle horn just as his horse stumbled into a prairie dog hole. What followed would drag him into a discovery that archaeologists wouldn't believe for another century. The dust cloud that erupted from their struggle blocked out the desert sun as Jake found himself being pulled across the rocky terrain of the Sonoran landscape. His horse, a reliable paint named Thunder, had broken free from the tangle, leaving Jake attached to nearly 1,000 pounds of pure Mustang fury. The stallion, a blood bay with a white blaze down its face, seemed to know exactly where it was going as it dragged the cowboy through mesquite bushes and over jagged rocks. Jake's hands burned against the rope as he tried to maintain his grip, his boots carving deep furrows in the sand and gravel. The mesa walls of the canyon country rose around them like ancient sentinels, their red sandstone faces telling stories of civilizations long forgotten. He could hear the thundering of more hooves behind them. The stallion wasn't alone. An entire herd was following, their calls echoing off the canyon walls in a symphony that seemed almost orchestral, almost planned. The drag continued for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. Jake's shirt was torn to shreds, his leather chaps scarred and smoking from the friction. Just when he thought his shoulders would separate from their sockets, the stallion stopped so suddenly that Jake slammed into its hindquarters with a grunt that knocked the wind from his lungs. When the dust settled and Jake's vision cleared, he found himself staring at something impossible. They were in a hidden canyon, completely enclosed by towering walls of striated rock that rose at least 300 feet on all sides. But it wasn't the geological formation that made Jake's jaw drop. It was what occupied the canyon floor. Spread before him was what appeared to be an entire town, but not like any frontier settlement he'd ever seen. The buildings were constructed from the same red sandstone as the canyon walls, but they were built into the rock face itself, rising in terraced levels like something from a fever dream. Circular towers spiraled upward, connected by bridges that seemed to defy the laws of physics. And everything was perfectly preserved, as if the inhabitants had simply vanished yesterday. The Mustang herd had formed a perfect circle around Jake, their eyes fixed not on him, but on the ancient structures. That's when Jake noticed the statues. Carved from the same red stone as the buildings, dozens of human figures stood in alcoves and on platforms throughout the terraced city. But these weren't crude frontier sculptures. They were so lifelike that Jake found himself checking to see if they were breathing. Each statue depicted a person in what appeared to be Native American dress. But the style was unlike anything Jake had seen in his years trading with the Apache and Navajo tribes. The clothing was more elaborate, the jewelry more intricate, and the expressions on their faces carried a weight of knowledge that seemed to peer directly into Jake's soul. Some held objects he couldn't identify, crystalline formations that caught and reflected light in ways that seemed to make them glow from within. As Jake slowly got to his feet, still holding the rope attached to the stallion, he noticed that the horse had calmed completely. In fact, all the Mustangs seemed to be in a state of reverent quiet, their heads lowered as if paying respects. The bay stallion walked forward with Jake in tow, heading directly toward what appeared to be the largest structure in the complex. A circular building with a domed roof that sat at the very center of the terraced city. The silence in the canyon was absolute except for the soft footfalls of the horses and Jake's own labored breathing. No birds sang from the canyon rim above. No insects buzzed in the desert heat. It was as if this place existed outside of time itself, preserved in a bubble of eternal stillness that made Jake's skin crawl with anticipation and dread. As they approached the central building, Jake noticed that the door, if it could be called a door, was actually an opening in the shape of a perfect spiral. The red stone around it was covered in symbols that seemed to shift and move when he wasn't looking directly at them. The stallion stopped at the threshold and turned to look at Jake with eyes that held an intelligence far beyond what any horse should possess. Jake's hand trembled as he reached out to touch one of the symbols carved into the stone doorframe. The moment his fingers made contact, the symbol flared with a warm, golden light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Then, as if responding to his touch, every statue in the canyon turned its head to look at him. The sensation of dozens of stone faces focusing their attention on him made Jake's blood run cold. These weren't statues at all. They were something else entirely. The eyes that fixed on him held awareness, purpose, and something that looked disturbingly like relief. As if they had been waiting for him, specifically him, for a very long time. One of the figures, a tall woman with an elaborate headdress depicting a coiled serpent, stepped down from her alcove. The sound of stone scraping against stone echoed through the canyon as she moved with fluid grace toward Jake. Her mouth opened, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. Jacob Morrison of the Morrison Ranch in the Superstition Mountains. Son of William Morrison and Sarah Morrison. Born under the blood moon of 1852. You have finally come home. Jake's rope slipped from nerveless fingers as he stared at the impossible sight before him. How could this stone figure know his full name, his parents' names, his birth date, details about his ranch that he'd never told another living soul? The woman continued to approach, and Jake could see that what he had taken for stone was actually something far more complex. A crystalline substance that seemed to contain swirling galaxies of light within its translucent depths. I don't understand, Jake managed to whisper, his voice cracking like a schoolboy's. What is this place? Who are you people? The woman smiled, and the expression was so human, so warm, that it made the entire situation even more surreal. We are the Anasazi, though that is not what we called ourselves. We are the guardians of knowledge that your world is not yet ready to receive. And you, Jacob Morrison, are our descendant. The last in a bloodline that stretches back 700 years to when our people first walked between the worlds. Behind her, more figures were stepping down from their alcoves and platforms. Men, women, children, an entire population that had been frozen in crystal stasis was awakening. Jake's mind reeled as he tried to process what he was seeing. The Anasazi were a legend, a people who had supposedly vanished from the Southwest centuries ago, leaving behind only empty cliff dwellings and unanswered questions. This is impossible, Jake said, backing away from the approaching figures. You're all dead. Your people disappeared hundreds of years ago. The woman shook her head, her crystalline hair catching the strange light that seemed to emanate from the canyon walls themselves. We did not disappear, Jacob. We transcended. When the great darkness was coming, when we saw what violence and ignorance would do to this land, we chose to step outside of time and wait. Wait for the bloodline to return. Wait for you. The bay stallion nudged Jake's shoulder with its muzzle, and Jake realized that the horse was no ordinary Mustang either. Its eyes held the same impossible intelligence as the crystalline people, and when it spoke, actually spoke in a voice like wind through canyon walls. Jake's last grip on reality finally slipped away. The time of waiting is over, last son of the star people. The world above grows dark with war and greed. Your people have forgotten the old ways, forgotten their connection to the earth and sky. You must choose now, remain in your time and watch your world destroy itself, or join us in ours and help heal what has been broken. Jake sank to his knees in the red sand of the canyon floor, overwhelmed by the impossibility of his situation. Around him, the crystalline figures of his supposed ancestors waited with infinite patience for his decision. Above, the desert sun was beginning to set, casting the canyon in shades of gold and amber that made the entire scene look like something from a dream. The woman who had first spoken knelt beside him, her touch surprisingly warm for something that looked like living crystal. I know this is difficult to accept, Jacob, but look around you. Feel the truth in your heart. Haven't you always known you were different? Haven't you always felt called to these canyons, drawn to places where others fear to go? Jake had to admit she was right. From childhood, he'd been drawn to the ancient ruins scattered throughout the Southwest. While other children played with toys and games, he'd spent his time exploring cliff dwellings and collecting pottery shards. His parents had worried about his obsession with the vanished peoples of the desert, never understanding why their son preferred the company of ghosts to the society of the living. What happened to you? Jake asked, looking up at the hundreds of figures now surrounding him. Why did you leave the world above? The woman's expression grew sad, and Jake could see pain flickering in the depths of her crystalline features. "We saw the future, Jacob. We saw the wars that would come, the way your people would ravage the land, poison the rivers, and slaughter the buffalo until none remained. We saw cities of metal and glass rising where sacred forests once stood, and we knew we could not stop it by force." She gestured toward the terraced city around them, and Jake noticed for the first time that every surface was covered in symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "So we built this place, a sanctuary outside of time where knowledge could be preserved. We learned to transmute our physical forms into crystal, to become living libraries that could wait however long was necessary for the world to be ready for wisdom again." Another figure approached, an elderly man whose crystal form sparkled with what looked like stars trapped beneath the surface. "But we are not the only ones who made this choice, young Morrison. Throughout the world, other peoples saw the same dark future and made similar preparations. In Tibet, the wise ones retreated to hidden valleys beyond time. In Ireland, the Druids entered the hollow hills. In Australia, the Aborigines walked into the dreamtime and stayed there." Jake's mind reeled at the implications. "You're saying there are others like you? Other groups of people who stepped out of history?" The old man nodded gravely. "The network of the awakened spans the globe, Jacob. We have been watching, waiting, and preparing for the time when humanity would face its greatest test. That time is coming soon. Within your lifetime, the world will teeter on the brink of destruction. Wars unlike anything history has ever seen. Weapons that can destroy entire cities in moments, poisons that will make the land itself sick." The bay stallion, still standing patiently beside Jake, added its voice to the conversation. "But there is hope. The children being born now in your time carry the seeds of a new consciousness. They will need guides, teachers who can help them remember the old wisdom and integrate it with the new knowledge. That is why you were called here, Jacob Morrison. You are meant to be one of those teachers." Jake looked around at the impossible city that surrounded him, at the crystalline people who claimed to be his ancestors, at the talking horse that had dragged him into this hidden world. Part of him wanted to dismiss it all as heat stroke or a blow to the head, but the rational part of his mind had to acknowledge that everything felt more real, more vivid, than his normal waking life had ever been. "If I agree to this," he said slowly, "what happens to my life above? My ranch, my horses, the people I know?" The woman smiled sadly. "Time moves differently here, Jacob. What seems like years in this place might be only days in your world. You can return whenever you choose, but you will be changed. You will carry knowledge that may seem like madness to those who haven't seen what you've seen." She stood and extended her hand to him. "But you will also carry power, the ability to heal, to see clearly, to help others find their way when the dark times come. The choice is yours, but know that either way, your old life is over. You can never return to the simple existence of a cowboy who knows nothing of the greater world." Jake stared at her outstretched hand, knowing that touching it would seal his fate one way or another. Around him, the canyon had filled with a soft, musical humming, the sound of hundreds of crystalline beings resonating in harmony. The Mustang herd had arranged themselves in a perfect spiral around the central area, their eyes reflecting the same golden light that emanated from the carved symbols. As the sun disappeared behind the canyon rim and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above, Jake made his choice. He reached out and grasped the woman's crystalline hand, feeling a shock of recognition that went deeper than memory, deeper than thought. In that moment, he saw his true history, not the simple story of a cowboy born to homesteaders, but the complex tale of a bloodline that stretched back to the Star People, the ancient ones who had first brought wisdom to Earth. The transformation began immediately. Jake felt his body growing lighter, his consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of his individual self. He could suddenly perceive the vast network of crystalline cities hidden beneath the American Southwest, each one connected to the others by streams of living light. He could sense the other awakened ones scattered across the globe, all maintaining their vigil, all waiting for the time of return. But even as Jake felt himself changing, becoming something more than human, he retained his essential self, his memories, his personality, his deep love for the wild places of the Southwest. He would be a bridge between worlds, he realized, carrying ancient wisdom into a future that would desperately need it. The woman who had been guiding him smiled as Jake's transformation completed. "Welcome home, Jacob Morrison. Welcome to your true heritage. Now your real work begins." As the crystalline city erupted in celebration, the sound echoing off the canyon walls like crystal bells ringing in a cosmic cathedral, Jake understood that he had been found by something he had been searching for his entire life without knowing it. The wild Mustang hadn't dragged him into this hidden canyon by accident. It had brought him exactly where he needed to be. Above them, the desert stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of cavalry trumpets drifted on the night wind as the world continued on its path toward a future that Jake now knew he was destined to help shape. The Old West was ending, but something far more extraordinary was about to begin. As the crystalline celebration continued around him, Jake felt a profound shift in his understanding of time itself. What the woman had told him about time moving differently in this place became viscerally real as he experienced moments that felt like hours, filled with visions of possible futures stretching out before humanity like branches on an enormous tree. In these visions, Jake saw the world of 1887 transforming with breathtaking speed. The frontier towns he knew would grow into sprawling cities of steel and glass. The railroad lines that were just beginning to crisscross the continent would multiply into vast networks carrying millions of people across distances that took him weeks to traverse on horseback. But with this progress came darkness, wars that would consume entire generations, weapons that could level mountains, and a growing disconnection between humanity and the natural world that had sustained them for millennia. Yet threaded through these apocalyptic visions were golden streams of possibility. Jake saw children being born in his time and the decades to come who carried within them the same spark of ancient wisdom that flowed through his own veins. These young souls would become the teachers, healers, and visionaries who would guide humanity through its darkest hours and into a new age of understanding. The elderly crystalline man approached Jake again, his star-filled form radiating warmth and paternal concern. "You see the weight of what we ask of you, young Morrison. To serve as a bridge between our world and yours requires great sacrifice. You will walk among your people carrying knowledge they are not ready to hear, seeing possibilities they cannot yet imagine." Jake nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle into his bones like the desert cold that came with dawn. "But I won't be alone, will I? You said there are others like me. Throughout time we have called others to this work," the old man confirmed. "Some have been drawn to hidden valleys in Tibet, others to sacred groves in Ireland or mystical sites in Egypt. Each serves as a guardian of wisdom in their own time and place. You will know them when you meet them. There is a recognition that goes beyond words, beyond rational thought." The woman who had first welcomed Jake stood beside the old man, her crystalline features reflecting the starlight that streamed down into the canyon. "But your particular role is unique, Jacob. The American West in your time is a crucible where the old world meets the new. Native wisdom clashes with European ambition. Ancient knowledge confronts industrial innovation. You will help determine which aspects of each survive and which are transformed." As if summoned by her words, the bay stallion approached the group. In the starlight, Jake could see that the horse's form was beginning to shimmer and change, revealing itself to be something far more than a simple Mustang. The creature's eyes held galaxies of wisdom, and when it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that resonated with the crystal formations throughout the canyon. "I have served as your guide for this initial awakening, Jacob Morrison, but my role here is nearly complete. When you return to the world above, I will remain with you, but in a different form. No longer will I appear as a wild horse to be captured. Instead, I will manifest as intuition, as the inner voice that guides you toward those who need your help and away from dangers you cannot yet perceive." The implications of this statement hit Jake like a physical blow. Everything about his encounter with the stallion, the 3-week pursuit, the apparent coincidence of his horse stumbling at just the right moment, even his decision to go Mustang hunting in this particular area, had been orchestrated by forces beyond his comprehension. "How long have you been watching me?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since your birth," the stallion replied simply. "Since before your birth, actually. The bloodline of the Star People has been tracked and protected for generations. Your great-grandmother was guided to meet your great-grandfather. Your parents were drawn together by forces they attributed to chance but which were actually careful design. Every significant event in your life has been part of a pattern leading to this moment. Jake felt a mixture of wonder and resentment at this revelation. So I never had free will? Everything I thought I chose was actually predetermined. The woman laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of crystal singing in a gentle breeze. Oh, Jacob, you misunderstand the nature of destiny. You have always had choices, millions of them. At every moment you could have chosen differently. But your essential nature, the deepest part of who you are, has always been oriented toward this path. We simply created circumstances that would allow your true self to emerge. She gestured toward the terraced city around them, where hundreds of crystalline figures were engaged in activities Jake was only beginning to understand. Some tended gardens of plants that seemed to grow from pure light. Others worked with geometric patterns that shifted and evolved as he watched. Still others appeared to be in deep meditation, their forms pulsing with rhythms that matched the stars wheeling overhead. This is what awaits humanity if the transformation succeeds, she explained. Not crystalline stasis, but conscious evolution. The ability to exist simultaneously in physical and spiritual dimensions, to commune directly with the living intelligence of the cosmos, to create beauty and harmony that transcends anything your current world can imagine. Jake watched the crystalline beings at their work, feeling both drawn to their serene purposefulness and homesick for the simple, rough life he had known as a cowboy. Will I ever be able to live normally again? To have a wife, children, a regular life? The old man's expression grew compassionate. Define normal, young Morrison. Will you be able to return to complete ignorance of what you've learned here? No. But will you be able to love, to form deep relationships, to experience joy and sorrow and all the emotions that make life worthwhile? Absolutely. In fact, your capacity for all of these will be greatly expanded. The question, added the stallion, is whether you can accept a life of service to something greater than personal comfort. The path we offer is not an easy one. You will face ridicule from those who cannot understand your insights. You will carry the burden of seeing potential disasters that others cannot perceive. And you will sometimes question your own sanity when the gap between your inner knowing and the world's accepted reality becomes too wide. Jake stood in the starlit canyon, surrounded by impossible beings offering him an impossible choice, and felt something deep within himself settling into perfect clarity. Despite all his questions and fears, he knew there was really no choice at all. The old life, the simple life of a cowboy who knew nothing of the greater mysteries, was already gone. He could not unknow what he had learned, unsee what he had witnessed, or unfeel the cosmic forces that were even now transforming his consciousness. I accept, he said quietly, his words carrying clearly in the crystalline stillness of the canyon. I don't fully understand what I'm agreeing to, but I accept the responsibility you're offering me. The moment those words left his lips, Jake felt a fundamental shift in the fabric of reality around him. The canyon, the crystalline city, the star-filled beings who had become his teachers and guides. Everything began to pulse with a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. He understood suddenly that this place, this moment, would become the touchstone for the rest of his life. Whenever he felt lost or overwhelmed by his mission, he would be able to return here in consciousness and remember who he truly was. The woman stepped forward and placed both her hands on Jake's shoulders. The connection is established, Jacob Morrison. You are now and forever a bridge between worlds. Go back to your time, live your life, but know that you carry within you the seeds of humanity's transformation. Plant them wisely, water them with compassion, and trust that they will grow in their proper season. As she spoke, Jake felt himself becoming lighter, more translucent. The canyon around him began to fade, not disappearing but becoming less immediately present, as if he were viewing it through layers of gossamer. The last thing he saw clearly was the bay stallion, its form already shifting back toward the familiar shape of a Mustang, nodding at him with eyes that promised their connection would continue. Then Jake was lying on his back in the desert sand, staring up at a sky full of stars that seemed closer and brighter than they had ever appeared before. His rope lay coiled beside him, and Thunder, his paint horse, was grazing peacefully nearby. Of the Mustang herd there was no sign, though Jake could swear he heard the distant sound of hoofbeats fading into the desert night. He sat up slowly, his body aching from the day's adventure, and looked around for any sign of the hidden canyon. But the landscape appeared completely normal, just another stretch of Arizona desert with its familiar complement of saguaro cacti and mesquite bushes. For a moment, Jake wondered if the entire experience had been an elaborate hallucination brought on by dehydration and too much sun. Then he noticed the rope in his hands. Instead of the ordinary hemp line he'd started the day with, he now held a length of cord that seemed to be woven from crystalline fibers. In the starlight, it pulsed with a soft, internal glow that made his skin tingle where he touched it. And when he looked closely at his hands, he could see faint traceries of light running just beneath the skin, following the paths of his veins like a second circulatory system made of liquid starlight. Jake Morrison, cowboy and Mustang hunter, mounted his horse and began the long ride back to his ranch. But the man who rode through the desert night was no longer the same person who had pursued a wild stallion into the Badlands that morning. He carried within him now the wisdom of ages, the responsibility of bridging worlds, and the knowledge that his real life's work was just beginning. Above him, the stars wheeled in their eternal patterns, and somewhere in the distance, a stallion's whinny echoed off the canyon walls, a sound that might have been wind, or memory, or promise, depending on how one chose to hear it. Jake smiled and urged Thunder toward home, knowing that wherever that home might be, he would never again walk through the world alone.